Good evening, everybody. Welcome to Looking Deeper with Denise King Francisco and the Reverend Sandra Herrick. It's good to have you with us wherever you are. The chat room is open. Come on in and join us for conversation tonight. Good evening, Sandra Herrick.
Good evening, Denise King Francisco, aka Dana.
That's right.
How are you?
I'm doing well. Hey, Kimberly Wink. Good to have you in the chat room.
Hi, Kimberly. Happy end of February. Here we go. Zoom for 2020.
Hard to believe.
Oh my God. And yesterday, two. Good Lord.
I was listening to NPR radio, which I listen to all the time. I'm a huge NPR radio fan. Anyway, They were mentioning what a spectacular day it was out there in Las Vegas for weddings yesterday, and apparently Las Vegas just reached it was either 5 million or 50 million wedding marker. It was some incredible number. And yesterday, I guess, was quite the day for people to want to be married because of all the twos.
Because of all the twos. Yeah. I had clients yesterday that were like, could you do it today? Could you do it today? All right, it's done. Oh, God. I felt it, but I'm telling you, it's like one of those things where how random, or how long did it take for us to get here?
Yeah.
Good Lord. Astounding.
It is astounding.
Everybody had a meaningful two.
To. Hey, Lady Hawk. Hi, Jennifer. Hello, Jessica. Good to have you in the chat room, and come on in, everybody, wherever you happen to be around Grandmother Earth. Welcome to the podcast. And when I mean around Grandmother Earth, that's exactly where we are broadcast. So thank you all. Sandy, you chose the subject for tonight.
Yeah.
It's always darkest just before the dawn. I love that saying for a variety of reasons. Why did you choose that topic for us?
Well, because it is very dark right now, and there's a crack of light. And what I mean is, like, the pandemic is kind of shifting. Doors are starting to open. Things are feeling a little different. It's spring light is just on the crest. The moon this last weekend was staggeringly bright in the darkest of nights. And I always have that feeling, even though here it is in February, it's kind of deceiving because it's cold. But the light, as it starts to come, offers some kind of hope. It offers some kind of deception of it's not as dark as it was, and it's not as light it's going to be. And I feel that we all are kind of at a door that's just cracking open. And I mean, how do you feel? Because I feel like it's atmospheric. I feel like it's circling the earth. There's a possibility. That's what I'm feeling.
I like that, and I agree. And I feel as though everything that's going on out there that we can perceive, that we're being made aware of outside of ourselves, we're having those same glimmers within ourselves. And I truly believe that the past many months, for so many of us, it has been about the dark night of the soul, or at least a glimpse into the dark night, or at least things have got a little bit dingier, or if it wasn't completely the dark night of the soul, it was, some shade of gray anyway.
Exactly.
And we're starting to see that pinpoint of light grow.
Exactly. And, in my own personal life, there has been a heaviness and a gratitude. And what that means to me is, even though the pandemic has been such a surprise and overwhelming, because of the fact that we're dealing with cancer in my home and the need to kind of very deeply focus, I am so grateful that something gave myself and Bobby permission not to stir outside, not to wander, not to be distracted by the outside, even though the outside is profoundly distracting. But that is the dilemma. It's so distracting out there that we went into the cave and there was permission because the world shut down. How did it work for you?
Well, I think in many of the same ways, it was permission to go within the cave. It was permission granted not to work 7 days a week. It was permission granted not to have to keep the house as clean as I normally do because there weren't as many people in my home. It was permission granted to spend some time reading a book.
Right.
Or, learning something new. Permission granted. And for a lot of people, many of us, we need permission to go in the cave, to sit down, to put our feet up, to crack open a book.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
And it's interesting because there's such a beautiful way about right now getting bored or being shut down from our addictions to activity or our addiction to productivity or our identity, our ego, all these things. Everything was affected in the beginning. And I'm now intrigued with how did everybody fare? How did our personalities change in that dark? How did we self-reflect? What started to stir or inspire us or get generated because we were in need of finding new thoughts and new ways of thinking? I mean, you became extremely productive in a very beautiful way. I
did. Ancestor veneration. I moved right up to the top of the list, ancestor veneration. And I've enjoyed every moment of that, yes.
Describe that, because that's a mouthful.
Learning who the bloodlines work their way to, and learning in the bloodline where the magic comes from, and knowing where the magic comes from and whom it comes from, to begin working in tandem with those members of the bloodline that carry the magic, have always carried the magic. And it brings a new flavor, if you will, and you've experienced this yourself up front and personal. It brings a new flavor to my work.
Yes.
It brings a new potency to the work.
A very deep dimension.
A very deep dimension. And simultaneous to all of that, I've become very interested in, I mentioned it just for a half a second on Ortrun and Carl's show this morning, about the movement in the United States, the deconstructing movement.
Yes.
That's huge. People in gigantic numbers are deconstructing their faith systems, their belief systems, and it's really rattling cages.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that's why I feel exactly your question, to answer it. It's a dark time because things don't have a consistency. Things are being questioned so deeply, or things are being destroyed so easily.
Mm-hmm.
I'm surprised at how easily things are being destroyed, or how the thought that something was strong was revealed that it wasn't, that it was more fragile. And I think that we've had a tremendous amount of exposure now, and a tremendous about the amount of time that's been necessary to do revealing, coming out of secretness. So much is like becoming visible and also available to look at.
Mm-hmm.
We're all looking with different eyes.
It's funny, just as you were talking, I just received a message from Ancestry.com.
Ah!
They literally left a voicemail and just now a text message.
What did they say?
That they were looking to partner with me into digging further into some of my Southern relatives, into some of those hidden archives. So,
wow.
Yeah, so all of that just happened just right now is a wonderful affirmation of what we're talking about.
Amazing.
And so I feel that people are deconstructing and they're reconstructing. And there's a lot of fear, there's a lot of darkness around deconstructing anything in our lives, but particularly when it comes to our religion, our family, our belief system, our faith. A lot of that has been going on for many of us.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
It's a wonderful time, and I mean this after all the horrors of shaking and rolling and rocking and being denied what we thought was normal, even though it wasn't normal at all. It was just routine. And for me, when I say just routine, I'm not being vague. I'm not being, oh my God, a baby just got born. And her name is Scarlett.
No.
Absolutely loaded there.
So there are two wonderful signs, right? All within 2 minutes of one another from the ancestors.
Oh, God. You all heard the bell. I mean, the baby just got born, and the grandma sent the picture. We have been waiting and waiting and waiting. Oh my God, and her name is Scarlett. This is hysterical.
It is.
Well, there you have it.
There you have it.
Over. I need to just go, yum. So that back there. So what I'm talking about the light is I'm wondering about in the meditative space of this darkness, even if we weren't meditating, we were pressed in some type of meditation because the activities we were used to were denied us. And I know that that's frustrating, or people go into withdrawal, people take it personal or feel like it was punishment. But there's been a stretch now long enough to give some distance to when it began and coming out the other side of the tunnel. And what I want to talk about tonight is no matter what, the only thing that is constant is change. No matter what. And I'm now curious about what will happen from all of this. How do we stand in the light and feel, is there gratitude? Is there an appreciation, or is who's devastated, who's appreciative, who's new, who's old, who's dug in deeper? Not everybody wants to see the light.
That is very true.
Even when the light shows up. So it's, the resistance to, do I have to change? I mean, how often do you see the resistance to change?
All the time. All the time. Part of what I do in my work is to help people understand the resistance to change and to help them change gracefully and at a pace that's amenable to their soul, to their path. Because with change comes fear, the fear of what if we're wrong? What if God isn't the way that God was described to me as a child and I have another belief system about that? What if at the end of all things I was wrong about that? And I think that we all take a look at that in variety of relationships that we have. If I change through this course of time, if I no longer want to sit on, as my sister Barbara calls it, my pity pot, if I'm willing to get up of that pot of victimization, what does that mean for me?
Right.
How does that bode for me going forward? If I go through with this divorce, if I go through with this change, if I go through with a new job, what does that mean?
Exactly.
If all of a sudden I'm willing and ready and cannot wait to just be me, the way that I really am, then what? That's a big one right now. I think a lot of people have discovered who they really are.
And who they really aren't.
And who they really aren't. And the reason I say that is because, with my clients and students and stuff, The number of people that now that they've been able to stay home and work in their what I call Stevie Nicks clothes, right? They don't
Yeah.
have to get on the corporate uniform. They can just be wearing what they need to wear, at least from the waist down, or they can put up their photo on Zoom, right? They get to dress the way and they get to have their incense burning. And it's liberating in some sense for many people because they get to self express
Yes.
in ways that they couldn't from 9 to 5. Does that make sense?
Oh my God, absolutely. And it's that place of we're no longer dressing for the ego of having to appear a certain way
Mm-hmm.
or having the power shift because we look like something. It's a very different visual that's happening. I'm in a great, I mean, I've been working on the phone and on Zoom and on Skype and, for years. So this was even amplified for me in a way that made it cozier, especially because Bobby's sick, to not have to give up my work and have the house be invaded or have him disturbed or have us have to say, you can't come because we need our privacy. It was just given to us.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
For me to be able, it was so funny. I was standing in front of my closet the other day and I looked at Bobby and I said, well, I've got a rotation about 5 floppy shirts. It's like,
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's winter, so it's like, this flannel, that fleece, that sweater. And it's like, I'm not going anywhere. And if I rotate, it's so easy. It's really, really easy.
Isn't that wonderful?
And it really is. And it takes away the anxiety of even, do you have to go out and buy something? Do you have to go out and get something? Do you have to go out and prove something? And the answer is no.
And we didn't need to all along. That's the revelation for many. Del Marie is adding a comment.
Yes, ma'am. Hi.
Del is saying, I see fear in many, anger, bashing leadership, and little is given to faith. Many of us have blind faith, faith and hope despite the negativity hovering over Mother Earth.
Say that last part again.
Many of us have blind faith, faith and hope despite the negativity hovering over Mother Earth.
And she is certainly one of them.
Giving hope, yes.
Yes.
The hope bringers.
And that's where coming out of the dark and where the dawn is. That's a beautiful statement, the hope givers. Holding the hope is not an easy job.
No.
Holding a sense of promise and loyalty is not an easy job. More so to self and finding self than to accommodating someone else, hoping they'll validate you to give you an image.
Mm-hmm.
And right now, I feel that there's this absolute ability for us to kind of not go back into the obsessiveness of the way we were living. I hope that we come back into it with, well, I'm watching it. People are leaving their jobs. People something else has happened. People don't have to work the same way. And so they know that that way of facing the world or even gaining your income and stabilizing your life is different.
Mm-hmm.
Because they've been given a life to live rather than only have to go someplace and navigate how do you get enough money to go home and have 3 hours to yourself each day.
Right. There's a deconstructing going on in so many layers, personally, professionally, in community, in families, deconstructing. And I think part of it is because the psyche, particularly in the United States, because we don't like this subject, and I'm just generalizing, the subject of death.
Right.
And grief.
Right.
In the hospitals, in hospices, in homes, in psychiatric places, death is everywhere in volumes. Todd gave me gave me a statistic the other day that beyond the 900,000 people that have died of COVID-related illnesses, beyond
Only
that,
here in America.
just in the United States, beyond that, we also had a surge of 1 million more deaths due to drug overdose, suicide, all of these other things, an added million. So we're drenched in, here in the United States, a place that doesn't even like to talk about death, we're drenched in grief. And so we're holding the light for not only our own personal endeavors and our own changes. I'm listening to David Bowie singing Changes in my brain while I'm talking about this.
Changes.
Exactly. I love David Bowie. So, but we're also holding the light of hope. I like that, Del. For those that are swimming in an ocean of grief.
It's interesting because I was speaking to a very, very dear friend who I met out in Montana and now lives in Australia. And we connect every once in a while. And today was one of those beautiful days. And it is amazing to know that, oh my God, I haven't seen this person physically, literally in 20 years. And yet I see her on Skype. It's like, well, it was yesterday, right, that we had coffee on 7th Avenue. And what she's talking about in Australia and about the children that she's seeing is that the younger generation and all the suicides that are happening is that they see no future for themselves.
Right.
They have not connected to the earth or to the routine or somehow bonded to nature because of the AI world or the what's happening in the iPhone or the pad or the computer. I mean, something that is so miraculous has desensitized the human connection in such a way that having to grow up and all of a sudden you have to get a job or take care of yourself or something, that they don't see a future.
Exactly. The virtual world that so many of our young people have been living in, attached to electronic devices, in some cases has usurped the physical world. And Del, I couldn't agree with you more with this statement. Us elders have lived through many challenges and still surviving and thriving. And the younger generation hasn't experienced it. So they are panicking with the challenges thrown at us. And that's true.
It's absolutely true. I know individuals, literally, one 27-year-old who is a geek, born and raised in the IA world, a genius on the computer that still lives in his bedroom.
Yes.
In the house, in the bedroom, buys online, shops for the food, things get delivered. They don't need to leave.
Right.
And make astronomical salaries.
Right.
And it is their world. I want to be able to figure out, how is that going to work? It's not my world. It's not the way, I mean, I'm a kid that lived outside. I'm somebody that, I come from a very different generation. And I believe, from talking to some of these individuals, it got darker because they had to move back home with their parents, or they had to downsize in a way that life was a shock rather than moving up toward life. They had to move backwards in order to have, and which gave them a lot of opportunity to save money and now to go back out there again. It's like time got stalled. And everybody's kind of poking their head out to find out if there really is life.
Yes.
What did we do in the past 2.5 years to recalibrate, readjust, reassess what life is?
Rebalance. It's about rebalancing and to Delmarie's point, it's about the pendulum swung. My husband is in the IT industry.
Yes.
That's how Todd, makes his income. He is in that industry. So we have that in the home, and he will be the first to admit that he's got to get up and go outside during the day.
Yes.
He's got to go outside, take a walk in the woods, put his feet in the grass, do whatever it is to reconnect. So the pendulum has swung so far one way into the darkness that it's swinging back, I believe, so that we as elders can help rebalance young people to remember Earth and living things around them. Earlier today, I was texting with Elise, and I said, it's about time for you to start really looking for a preschool for Easton. And I'm going to suggest, as his grandmother, that perhaps you find a charter or a Montessori school that specializes in the outdoors and animals.
Absolutely.
Within 10 minutes, she had located a school right here in Lowell that's emphasis is on farm animals and the outdoors.
Perfect.
And so the reason for that is that little boy can come into this house and he could probably sit at my computer and run it better than I can at 2 years old.
I wouldn't doubt it for a moment.
And understanding, to Delmarie's point, exactly, Danielle, it's the forest school. Yes. And so, whether he ends up at that one or another one in the area, the point is that he's already wired coming into the world at this time to know wires and to know technology. Exactly. As elders, yes, as elders, we need to also help the young ones remember Grandmother Earth and the beings that they occupy Grandmother Earth with.
And that will stall some of the process of elimination of any and all species, because they're interacting with them and know them, rather than be dismissive of it because they don't even know that they exist or know that they have purpose.
Absolutely. I mean, the first time I held a possum at Amber Covell's animal rescue, I love all animals anyway, you know that.
Yes.
But the first time I held a possum, oh my God, I was in love. And being here in the Enchanted Forest, all of the animals here have a name. And so the other night, our local possum, whose name is Violet, came right up to the back of the house and, was nose to nose with Gabriel for a minute.
Aww.
Yeah. And I thought to myself, I wonder how many adults, let alone children, understand the importance of that possum, or how possums want to be loved just like everybody else. Do you know what I'm saying? I think maybe part of the restructuring or the rebalance, Sandy, is coming to remember that.
Well, interesting, you've got a possum story. Bobby's been putting seed out on the front door, on the banister, and for the fall, we put cats out there on the deck. That's where Blackjack lived his final months, just living on the deck.
Love Blackjack.
I know. And lo and behold, at night, this possum would come and so gently just eat. And one night we saw the babies clinging on to its teats. And I thought, but then it was like, where are you living? You're awful close to the front door.
Yeah.
But it's like they're important to us.
Mm-hmm.
What they do, how they do it, why they do it. And, to see the nocturnal and to experience, I didn't have to be frightened. It's not a rat. It's a friendly being and necessary. I don't know its job. Do you know its job?
Yeah.
What's its job?
Well, Violet's job, and the job of all possums, is to eat mice, eat rats, eat ticks, and kind of is like the vermin exterminator.
Well, she better get busier.
That's what they do.
I gotta tell Bobby stop putting food on the deck. She needs to be hungry.
Yeah, that's exactly what they do.
I didn't know that they ate rats.
Yes, and mice and ticks. And so we love having them in the forest because,
Oh, yeah. I
yeah,
mean, and it's a very bad tick season. And, I went down the cellar the other day and it was like, oh no, something's moved in.
yeah, yeah. Del Marie is saying young ones know more of corporate signs than knowing names of natures. Yeah, the material world has snatched right onto them.
This is true. This
Yeah,
is
and it's the time of the ancestors, right? It's the time of the return of and the acknowledgement of our ancestry and our elevated ancestors. And it's,
so. How do you find them bringing light, Dana?
huh?
How do you find them bringing light?
Well, I was just going to say, Sandy, when we personally have the darkest moments of our life, when we think that we don't have another inch to go forward,
Right.
where does the light come from? And sometimes that light comes from knowing that the ancestors are with us. Sometimes it comes from the light of having a friend with you or a relative with you during those dark times. But sometimes for many people, when we find ourselves on our own knees, thinking, I don't even want to be here anymore. What is this all about? And good Lord, what have I gotten myself into? Sometimes people have a hard time reaching out because maybe they feel like then they're a failure or they don't want people to know they're vulnerable. And so for me, in the darkest times, I'm not typically someone who will ask for help, but I know that I always receive, I call it divine intervention. I don't know if it's my ancestors, tapping Lily on the shoulder saying, fly to Michigan, or, you picking up the phone and calling me at 4 a.m. and saying, what's going on? But I know that there's somebody somewhere if I wait long enough. I mean, when you're in that place of sheer inky darkness, how do you know the light's going to come along? Who do you think turns that light on, and where's it coming from?
Well, that's a spectacular question, and I want everybody to be able to know that part of the credibility in acquiring wisdom or being able to even tell a story about survival or how character gets built or the magic that there's been an intervention or a rescue is the simple experience of having it.
Yes.
And that it is about an attitude, because I know there are times when I've been in hardship and I wonder, why am I being punished, or why me, or how the heck am I going to get out of this, or oh my God, how did I get there again, or when will I learn? I mean, we have a litany of a vocabulary, a self-talk, depending on the situation. And interestingly enough, for me, each situation has brought maybe a different sign of divinity, or an act from a kindness of a friend, or an apparition that all of a sudden appears or even intervenes. Because I know for a fact there are octaves of energy that are greater than my ability in my mind as a human to comprehend when I'm just orbiting my own ego or wanting to strive for my own self-achievement. And there are times when I've been struck down. I mean, struck down. Heartbreak, shock, life, death, humility, insult. I mean, it's amazing what can bring us to our knees. And to lose faith in my own identity, or to be traumatized away from feeling that my heart is safe. Each one brings it makes me kind of cry, because each one has brought a different realm to get me through it or to bring me to the brink. And I mean it. I have had apparitions show up and me sit there and look at them and go like, who are you? What are you doing? Leave me alone. What do you want?
Mm-hmm.
Friend, like you say, call. Like they didn't even know. And if I answer that, it's like, what do you need? And what I needed was just to know that somebody would be there in case. To know that there are people I can call because I am, I'm very private also, that they would have the right thing to say at the right moment. And it's not that they figure it out, but they are the light that lets me figure something out. And I think that that's what we're always talking about is we come up with recipes or remedies or a touch. But real deep change comes when we figure out there's a step in front of us if we just allow ourselves to slowly touch it. I mean, one of the greatest, in my past year and a half, one of my greatest dark moments was given an apparition that I was going to fall off of a horse. And I got on the horse anyhow. And I fell off the horse and, cracked my ribs, broke ribs. But what was more important was because I had the vision that it was going to happen, I stretched out as I fell so I wouldn't break a leg or an arm or my neck. My ribs got me, but I lost my breath. And in that moment, there was that absolute shock that George Floyd, the black man that was murdered, suffocated, came right in front of me. And when I say that, it's that place of someone lost their life and came to me and said, hang on, you're going to breathe. Hang on, you're going to breathe. How that happens, Dana, I have no idea. And I mean that sincerely with, where did my psyche go to? How did his psyche find me? It wasn't God per se. It wasn't an angel. It was a black man who just had his life ended by having his breath stopped. And how my soul connected to that, or my heart connected to that, or my empathy, or even his darkness being the light for me, that's shocking. That's shocking. So there are ways things happen that I can tell you the story of, but I don't always have how. I just know that the mystery is so magnificent. And here I am on the other side of it in some way. And only now am I, really starting to walk again. Or, the other day I took myself to the hospital. I was standing in the kitchen and thought, I'm having a heart attack. Bobby's getting chemo. I'm all alone. It's like, well, do I call 911 or do I just drive myself in? And, it took me a little while to text you out there. So, okay, I'm in the ER.
Mm-hmm.
As soon as I could find my breath to say, I'm safe enough to drive, I'm safe enough to go, what I felt I needed was a reality check. Someone to hold me in the light and someone to give me a reality check. And it turned out it was an anxiety attack. And in those moments, we don't know how to breathe. We kind of have to remember air is there, help is with us, and the sip of breath will come. That the earth is given this. How can we tell people? I've never said it that way before. Earth is given this as a ally, all these spiritual atmospheres, all these opportunities to think and connect and be fragmented by or bonded to Earth comes equipped with this. It's part of its atmospheric dimension. And I wonder how the essence of light even figured out leave us so we would be in the dark long enough to not always just expect the light to be there, but to look for it also. Because there is that place where sometimes we have to walk to it, and sometimes we have to huddle down and wait for it.
Yes. Well, I believe that, and thank you for sharing all of that, Sandy.
Thank you for letting me share it.
I believe that talking about the soul, talking about spirit, is another one of those conversations that's been left unsaid or undone here in the United States in favor of talk about religion. And I believe that part of what we're all coming out into the light of day with is the understanding that religion is one thing and talk of the soul and talk of the spirit is another. And it's necessary to talk about the soul and spirit because it's the soul that's always in conversation with creation. It's that place that finally gives us information about the coming of the light, or in advance that the light will be there, in advance that something is going to happen, but you're going to be okay. Yes. Because the soul is letting you know, or in those darkest of times, it's the soul that reaches out to another and says, call that person, text that person, send a card, do what you need to do to reach out. Yes.
Yeah, it's in the quiver.
It's in the quiver. And so conversation of soul and spirit is no longer for the corner. It's no longer for being in the closet. Its time has finally arrived. Yeah. The return of the mystic is here and of the mystery.
And that's where I feel like the return of the awareness that the earth came equipped is wired electrically, emotionally, physically, atmospherically, magnetically, all the alleles that we can come up with. That for how many millions and millions and billions of years before the last 30 of whatever the technology is that's going to take us to the next realm, somehow it brought us this technology. Somehow it even brings us to prepare for whatever we're dark in now that this light will bring.
Mm-hmm. Well, it reminds me of the invention of the automobile, right? At first, when automobiles were made, there weren't any rules of the road. You got on the road and you went. There were no seat belts. There weren't even roofs on some of them, right? So you got in your vehicle and you just went, and the calamity ensued, but everybody was so happy that they could, ride in a Model T or Model A or what have you. And Detroit was just putting them out. And so everybody was so enamored with the birth of the automobile, and eventually, when it was realized they probably needed some rules of conduct, all of a sudden there was a balance found out of necessity.
And how many dark nights of the soul with people dying or the accident?
Yes, the medical.
The road rage.
Exactly. And along the lines of the rebalance, I believe we're finally, hopefully, coming into a place where we can talk about mental health.
Yes.
Because that is another conversation that's been hidden in the dark, that I believe is also emerging along with spirit and soul, is the psyche.
Well, I absolutely agree that in the past 40, 50 years, and that's literally how young the new age is, or psychology as a not the secret in some institution that, the woman gets sent off to and locked up in. I mean, there have been institutions for hundreds of years, but the insane asylums where people were sent and locked away and kept away.
Mm-hmm.
And now to see that mental illness or the capacity to rationalize has many, many angles, and we need to talk about the opportunity that even the soul has many, many angles of mental health or spiritual health. I mean, that in itself, we have seen people with sick souls, tormented souls.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
And bring souls to the forefront even allows that then to go deeper than it's not just in your mind, it's in your soul.
Mm-hmm.
And we have personally seen when someone's soul is touched and healed and loved, their mind starts to realize they're okay.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
They come out of their own insanity.
I was listening to a psychiatrist the other day talking about addiction. And she posed the thought that addiction is not a disease. Addiction is the result of unresolved, unhealed wounding and trauma.
Oh, yeah.
And I thought, wow, what a way to look at it, rather than just say, oh, it's a disease, blah, blah. Where did it come from? What's the trauma? Is it generational trauma? Is it a modern trauma? Is it unresolved? How can we resolve it? I thought that was a wonderful way of looking at it, having grown up with a lot of addiction around me. Looking at people in that light rather than, well, it's just a disease they acquired somewhere along the road of their life, but to look at it rather as something that's latent, that's trying to express, but doesn't know how to express appropriately or in a healthy way.
Well, I think what you're talking about is exactly what we're talking about tonight in the dark, here it is. How long have we been in the dark about addiction?
Right.
And all of a sudden there's a new light on it. And it's only because it's so rapid. I mean, it's been around forever, but now it too is a pandemic.
Mm-hmm.
No different. I mean, for Todd to come up with another million people to suicide or through addictions or what, that pandemic is paralleling what we've all had as it's over here, it's over here, it's over here.
Right.
Everywhere.
Yes.
And mental health is only now starting to look at different vehicles or depths of spirituality, the soul, the realms. Mm-hmm. And I think because there are people now being educated in psychological world that have the experience of leaving religion as the only way to process something sacred and integrating something more in a personal way through personal experience that gives them the intelligence to say, there's more than I understood.
Yes.
I'm bigger than the way I was brought up.
Yes.
I have a feeling that's bigger than God in nature. Or I don't understand this God. I understand that God. We are given the avenues to alternatives.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's very potent to know that, gratefully, I'm old enough to say I was there at the beginning of the New Age movement. And that beginning of the New Age was very much a part of the feminist movement. And it's only 50 years old. And that's shocking. That what is now being taken for granted by some of the new generations was hard work for mine.
Mm-hmm.
And mental illness is still one of the great mysteries.
Yes.
And I agree with you. It's time to look at the soul, not just the chemistry.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
And to blend, to make the that it's because the chemistry has done a lot of good, but it doesn't cure it. And the spirituality, it's like it brings a different accountability. And I agree with you that to just say that it's it's the disease. I mean, I want to honor my husband. He's sober now for over a year. And he is actually able to say he is clear that he's not even haunted by what he has been classified as addictive in him.
Mm-hmm.
He's seeing another world. He's so grateful to be able to have this new light in his life. And it couldn't have been much darker for him a year and a half ago. I mean, you don't get darker than that. And the beauty that there's a light that literally gives you something to believe so that you can continue, age, and die.
Right.
Because it goes right back to what you said. People are so frightened of dying. They're so frightened of grieving because they're frightened of dying.
Mm-hmm.
And it's the only thing we really got to do on this planet.
Yeah. Del Marie is saying, had a real good conversation with Sean, who is her son, about the correlation of your spirit lost and the problems that are incurred. What does it mean to you ladies? What happens, do you believe, Sandy, when you lose your spirit or your connection to spirit?
Oh, Del, that is such a beautiful, beautiful, honest question. And it's so soulful to have the courage to speak of that with your grandchild, your children. And I have seen, I will use this as an example. When I was in high school, my future husband had a very horrendous childhood and acted out and, became an alcoholic and was doing some robbing and, he robbed some money from a friend, blah, blah, blah. And it was just enough money for it to be a felony. It was $175. He went to court and he was given, back to school, go to the service, jail. He went to the service. He lost his spirit in the service because he went to the Vietnam War. That doesn't mean the service is wrong. It means that's where he lost his spirit. He lost his essence. He lost faith. And when he came back, I saw this man challenged, didn't have an identity, and did all the things right in order to have one or to acquire one, according to if you do this and be obedient, you will then receive. And I have to say, what I saw in my heart was the tragedy of someone's eyes having no light, someone's fear consuming them, and their anger having no outlet, except just to either destroy everything around them or to self-destruct and to drink. I never took my love away from him. I had to take my life away from him, but I never took my love away from him. And when I watched his spirit come back to him, it's because we were able to have a talk like you're talking with this child, to let him know what happened to him is one thing, and that he is responsible to his soul. Don't let anybody steal it. Don't let anybody rob you of it or tell you you are less than really who you are. And there's so many things I can say about it, but what I really want to hold is the fact that when someone does hold the light up to someone's darkest moment, the mirror of the spirit can be returned. By seeing it in your eyes, he can find it and maybe bring it into his. So don't give up. But what you're saying, Del, is so true. When someone loses their spirit, they become a walking zombie. They deny themselves to even think there's anything worth thinking about. And we have to remind them. We have to touch them. We have to hold them. Even sing to them, tell the stories. Bring them out into nature, just like Dana's saying. She's starting with Easton. Go back to basics. Go for a walk. Don't let his vacantness, and pray. I'm very serious. Pray to his spirit to come back to him. Ask it to call him down. I'm doing a lot of work right now with soul retrievals, and it's literally that these people are coming to me and saying, who, what, where, how, and it's their soul calling to them to say, let's find someone that will help you hear that as the soul, I'm calling to you. I want you to come back to wherever you left me, or we were lost, or where the trauma is. That trauma has to be touched. It has to be worked out. It has to have the emotions that created it, that it has, be expressed. Thank you for letting me talk.
Mm-hmm.
I hope that supports you, Del.
It reminds me of a story that Grandfather Bearheart, he was a Creek holy man. And he talked about the time that one of the young men from his tribe came back from Vietnam, and he came back in a wheelchair. He was paraplegic. And the young man went to see Grandfather Bearheart and said, I want to walk again. I want to be whole again.
Excuse me.
And it's not as though he had shrapnel in his spine or any of that, but he came back traumatized by his experience in Vietnam and found himself unable to walk. And Grandfather Bearheart, being grandfather, took him down to the lake, and he pushed his wheelchair out to the end of a dock, and he dumped him into the lake. And Grandfather said to him, call your soul back into your body. You left it in Vietnam.
Exactly.
And that young man, of course, he was paddling for all he could with his arms and his hands, and he called his soul back. And as Grandfather Bearheart talks about it in his book, the young man swam to the edge of the lake and walked out.
Yes. Right.
Yeah, and I think, that's obviously a literal story, but I think that there are times in our lives when we have the metaphorical version of that going on for ourselves.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It does take the effort. You don't give up on them, but they have to fight. They have to want it back.
Yes.
And that is the cure. They have to want it back and know that it's worth having.
Yes.
I mean, I say prayers for her and her grandson, and this generation needs love.
Mm-hmm.
So much love.
Hey, Julie, up there in Central Michigan. It's good to have you in the chat room. Julie is sharing, singing is a great way to release trauma and calm down the nervous system. It sure is.
Absolutely.
Amen to that. Del Marie is responding with, being traumatized so many times as a police officer, she always took herself to do a cleansing and prayers for her spirit.
Yes.
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 Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It's interesting. It's my panic attack the other day. I was wondering where it came from, and I kind of forgot how much trauma I've been through and been so strong with. So it's not just my personal trauma on me, it's the trauma around me that I'm being strong for, that I'm watching, that I offer my life to, and I'm spent. I mean, I've told you what 2.5. I just like I'm breaking down now.
Mm-hmm.
There's like I have all the compassion in the world, and I'm vulnerable.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's that 911 call to myself that's like, wait a second, Sandy, we do have to breathe. We do have to calm down. We do need to come back in and allow the spirit to come back into me and not just use it through me to others, but to keep some for me again.
Yes.
Really keep it for me. And so, yes, to recover is a very powerful word, but it's a mandatory procedure and it's not instantaneous.
Mm-hmm.
It takes time. But we need to know that it's necessary.
Yes, healing is so necessary for all of us, whether it's with a shaman or a holy person or a psychologist or whomever. Todd and I were listening to a psychologist the other night talking about empaths. And, some people saying they're so empathic that they can hardly go out in public because they're so sensitive to everybody else's other stuff. But this is the greatest gift God could have ever given them, but they're so empathic, why would they be given blah, 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 blah. And this psychologist posited that it's not that one person is more empathic or sensitive than the other, but perhaps the more quote unquote empathic person grew up in a household where they had to be hypersensitive.
Exactly.
Walking on eggshells, waiting for the next shoe to drop.
Exactly.
In their own household, that continued on into their adult life, and they've been told by somebody, oh, you're just an empath. Which makes them then think that the gift that they have for being sensitive to other things is actually a curse when, again, it's unresolved trauma from childhood, having had to be hypervigilant.
And you and I have talked about this, where somebody's antennas are so stretched out, you get electrocuted.
Yes.
And that is, that's where it is. It's like, my antennas were really stretched out, and I knew it, but I didn't realize, wait a second, I'm not taking quite as good care of myself as I need to.
Yes.
And it's not shutting down. It's protecting myself.
It's okay to say no.
It's so good.
And it's okay to say I need help.
Yeah, it's so good.
And it's okay to not have the answer right in that moment, huh, Sandy?
And I think that's what we're talking about. When you're in the dark, you normally feel shame.
Yes.
Because shame loves the dark. Shame hits you up the side of the head and knocks you down and crawls across the floor with you and tells you to go down lower. That shame is so filled with venom that we have to be able to ask for help, not out of our vanity that somebody better help me, but out of our purity, that there is always help somewhere,
Yes.
even with our own soul, to remind us. And I know there are places that are darker than pitch itself, and I want to send light to it because I don't want this to be glib. We're in a lot of trouble in lots of places. But there's some, I can feel it. There's a brink of something cracking.
Yes.
And it is our psyche. It is our soul. It is our society. It is our rules. It is our political, manufacture of what is America. Everything is cracking.
Mm-hmm.
And if there's a crack, there'll be light.
Mm-hmm.
So that's what I've got to say about that.
And when that light appears, sometimes there's a little hard work yet to do.
Well, that's when the real hard work begins.
A little honest reflection and some honest answers to be had,
right.
And to be strong enough to give those answers.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And recovery isn't easy.
No.
Recovery is harder than being in pain. I mean, I want to be able to say that. Recovery is harder than being in pain. Pain is almost a luxury at some point because it's like, oh, I don't have to do anything in the pain. It's like, if you face your pain and face the dark, so many people are more frightened of that because they become so comfortable and familiar in their pain.
Yes.
And that's where the danger is.
Yes.
So, well, okay.
Well, that was a great conversation, Sandy. Thank you, everyone, for joining Sandy and I live, and for those of you that are listening to us in the archive and wherever you happen to be around grandmother. You know, the sun is rising.
It is.
And it's rising for all of us together. It's amazing when we're all looking at the sunrise together, how potent that sunrise becomes.
It's true.
Mm-hmm.
Well, okay. Thank you, February, for coming out and being your beautiful self. When's spring?
In just a few short weeks.
Oh, thank God. I can, and we're supposed to march in like a lion, out like a lamb. So come on, snowstorm.
Come on. Good night, everybody.
Okay, everybody. Bye-bye. Love to all of you. Take care.
Good night, Sand.